You sure about this, Adrian? The words hit him like a freight train, slicing through the fog of pain and confusion. Adrian Wells barely registered them, his vision blurring as the sharp sting in his side grew louder, the blood pooling around him darker than it should have been. He's not supposed to be the one getting shot, damn it. But here he was, sprawled on the cold floor of the Valtherian embassy, gasping for air as his body screamed in protest. The bullet had barely grazed his ribs, but the searing pain in his chest told him it was enough. Enough to make him wish he hadn't stood in front of the alien woman he had sworn to protect. Enough to make him question his life choices. And then, just like that, the weight of it all hit him. The cold, unfeeling eyes of the assassin. The bullet that had been meant for Selis. The Valtherian ambassador who was still alive, thankfully. Adrian, came her voice again, softer now, almost gentle. He turned his head, the movement taking more effort than he expected. She was kneeling beside him, her violet eyes wide with concern, her dark hair falling over her face like liquid midnight. The way she gazed at him, so intense, so full of something else, felt too intimate for their strange relationship. "You'll be okay," Selis murmured, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. But Adrian could hear the doubt in her voice. She wasn't as sure as she wanted him to believe. Neither of them were. He had seen the way she fought back the urge to panic. The Valtherian people, strong and proud as they were, didn't show fear. Not openly. But Adrian could see it. A flicker of something foreign in her gaze. Concern. This wasn't supposed to be the way it went down. They were supposed to stop the assassination, secure the area, and get her safely out of the embassy. They weren't supposed to be dealing with bullets and bloodshed. They weren't supposed to be dealing with this. But then again, nothing in his life had gone according to plan. "I've had worse," Adrian grunted, his lips pulling into a weak, crooked grin, though the blood on his hands was hard to ignore. No time for a victory lap, not now. Selis didn't seem convinced by his bravado, her gaze softening. She was staring at him with the intensity of someone seeing something they shouldn't. Something between them. The air around them hummed with the weight of it. Suddenly, the pain in Adrian's side seemed to dull, almost as if it was fading away. He blinked, confused, trying to focus. What the hell? Selis' eyes widened, and she pulled her hand back in shock. What just happened? Adrian tried to push himself up, but the force of his own body's weakness made it nearly impossible. That's not normal," Adrian whispered under his breath. Selis looked just as surprised. Her gaze turned inward, her mind clearly racing. She blinked rapidly, almost as if trying to process what she had just experienced. "I didn't," she started, but then cut herself off, clearly unsure of how to explain what had just happened. "Did you just heal me?" Adrian asked, his voice hoarse. For a moment, the two of them simply stared at each other, a strange tension growing between them. This was no ordinary bond, Adrian realized. What had started as an accidental moment of care, a split-second decision to shield her from an assassin's bullet, was morphing into something much deeper. Something that, quite frankly, terrified him. Selis' brow furrowed. This shouldn't be possible. Adrian tried to sit up again, but this time, the sensation was different. He felt lighter, stronger. The bullet wound, what little of it there was, seemed to be healing right before his eyes. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice shaky. You're not supposed to be able to heal. Not like this. Not with me," Selis explained slowly, her words carrying the weight of something ancient, something that made Adrian's heart race in his chest. "Not unless." "Unless what?" "Unless you're—" She trailed off, but the look she gave him was all too telling. A realization washed over her face, and it sent a chill down Adrian's spine. Something deeper than mere protection was happening here. Something impossible. "You're like us," Selis breathed, almost as though she couldn't believe the words herself. "You're one of us now." Adrian's mind went blank, even though the pieces started to fall into place. "What do you mean, one of us?" She looked at him, her gaze fierce and full of emotion. "You're not just a human anymore. You're part Valtherian now." Adrian froze. "What? You're saying I didn't mean for it to happen," Selis interrupted, her voice tight. But the bond, it's stronger than we thought. You've been bound to me in a way that shouldn't be possible for a human. It's the kind of bond only life mates share. Adrian blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend the absurdity of her words. A life mate? She nodded gravely. A bond that cannot be broken. It's rare. Almost unheard of. For a moment, Adrian tried to digest everything she was saying, but the pain and confusion clouded his thoughts. Was he seriously hearing this right? That's impossible, he muttered, his voice fading. I'm just a security specialist. There's no way I'm some alien hybrid. Selis looked down at her hands, clearly trying to focus. It doesn't make sense to us either. But what's happening between us, it's happening for a reason. A reason we can't ignore. There's something larger at play here, Adrian. Something dangerous. Adrian struggled to push through the haze of confusion that clouded his mind. Part of him was still processing the fact that he'd been shot, right through the ribs. Another part of him couldn't grasp the weight of what Selis had just said. He was somehow bonded to her? He was a hybrid now? You're telling me I'm not human anymore? He asked, trying to sit up, his voice a bit sharper than he intended. He reached for his side, expecting to feel the sticky warmth of blood, but when his fingers brushed against his skin, there was no wound. Nothing. The pain he'd been feeling a few moments ago had vanished. Selis didn't immediately answer. She looked at him, her gaze intense but distant, as if weighing her words carefully. What you are, it's something no one could have predicted. Not even me. He glanced at her, still incredulous. So, what now? Am I supposed to walk around telling people I'm part alien? She shook her head, her lips pressed tight. No. This bond, it's not something to take lightly. And it's not something you can explain to others. Not yet. We need time to understand what's happening. Adrian didn't know if time was something they had. It wasn't like they were in some safe, peaceful corner of the universe. The assassin who had shot him was still a threat, and whoever had sent them hadn't forgotten about their mission. And the assassin? He asked, his voice cold and focused. What happened to them? Selis's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing. They didn't make it. But this is bigger than just one assassination attempt. There's a faction within the Valtherian Council, traditionalists who... Her voice trailed off, and Adrian could see the tension rising in her shoulders. Whatever she was about to say wasn't something she took lightly. Who what? Adrian pressed. His instinct screamed at him that he needed more information, and fast. He didn't know how much time they had left before the next danger found them. They believe, Selis continued slowly, that humans and Valtherians can't mix. They want to prevent any possibility of interbreeding, of merging our species. They see it as a threat to the purity of our bloodlines. Adrian's chest tightened, his mind struggling to grasp the implications of her words. A part of him wanted to scoff. After all, who cared about some outdated, racist beliefs? But another part of him realized how deep this went. It wasn't just about some radical ideas. It was about their survival. About his survival. So, they're trying to stop human Valtherian interbreeding by creating a biological weapon? Adrian asked, the words feeling like a punch to the gut. Selis nodded gravely. Yes, they've developed a weapon that targets the genetic compatibility between our species. If they succeed, it would mean the end of any chance for unity. Any chance of peace between us. Adrian felt a knot form in his stomach. And you think this has something to do with me? Yes, Selis replied. Whatever this bond is, it's proof that humans and Valtherians are compatible. More than compatible. Your connection to me, it's not a fluke. It's real. But it's not just some random thing, Adrian said slowly. You said it's like a life-mate bond. That means... It means you've become part of me, she finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. And me part of you. It's not something you can undo. Adrian rubbed his temple, trying to make sense of it all. His life had always been straightforward. Protection, security, follow the orders, do the job, and go home. Now he had a whole new identity to contend with. And this bond? It wasn't just some metaphor. It was real. Too real. Great, Adrian muttered. So, I've got a target on my back now, huh? You already did, Selis answered quietly. But now, they'll be hunting you even more. Adrian exhaled sharply. The weight of the situation settled over him like a lead blanket. He wasn't just some low-level security guy anymore. He was a hybrid, a living, breathing symbol of the very thing those traditionalists wanted to destroy. His very existence could topple their carefully constructed beliefs, their power. And if that wasn't enough, Selis was right. The danger wasn't over. It had just begun. Adrian's hand instinctively went to the gun on his belt. But there was a problem. His body wasn't the same as it had been before. His senses felt sharper, his reflexes quicker, but there was a strange, unidentifiable force pulsing through him. It was like his blood was flowing differently, stronger, more alive. Before he could process any more, Selis stood up and extended a hand to him. "We need to leave. Now." He didn't hesitate, taking her hand and letting her pull him to his feet. There was no time to waste. The assassin had failed, but the war was far from over. The embassy would be crawling with security by now, and their enemies would be regrouping. They needed to get out before someone realized just how significant Adrian's transformation truly was. "Where are we going?" Adrian asked as they moved through the darkened hallway of the embassy, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Selis glanced at him over her shoulder, her face set with resolve. "I have a place we can hide. It's safe for now, but there's something I need to show you. Something that will explain what we're dealing with." Adrian nodded, his mind racing. The urgency in her voice made him realize they had to act fast. But part of him couldn't shake the strange feeling in his gut. Whatever they were about to uncover, it was going to change everything. As they moved deeper into the shadows, Adrian couldn't help but think about what Selis had said. "You've become part of me." That bond, that connection between them. Whatever it was growing stronger with each passing second. And if the enemies that had targeted her were right, that bond would be the key to everything. The key to their survival. But also, the key to the future of two worlds. The journey ahead of them wouldn't be easy. They would be hunted, pushed to the limits of what they knew about themselves and each other. But what was undeniable was the power of their bond. No matter the challenges, Adrian and Selis had become something more than they had ever planned. Something greater, something no one had anticipated. And together, they would face whatever was coming next. They moved swiftly through the darkened corridors of the embassy, the air thick with tension. Adrian's mind raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He still couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. How he had gone from a human security specialist to a hybrid, connected to an alien ambassador in ways that defied all logic. His pulse quickened as they reached a stairwell at the end of the hall. Selis led the way, her steps light but purposeful. The silence between them was heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts and the weight of the danger surrounding them. Every corner they turned felt like it could be their last, but Selis's confidence was unwavering. She knew where they were going. Adrian didn't, but he trusted her. As they reached the exit doors at the back of the building, Selis paused. Her hand hovered over the handle, and for a moment, Adrian saw the conflict in her eyes. She was weighing her options, thinking about the next move. "What's wrong?" Adrian asked, his voice low. "I'm not sure how much time we have," she replied softly, glancing around. "But we have to get to the safe house. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that they'll find us." Adrian nodded. His hands subconsciously tightened around the grip of his weapon, the cool metal reassuring in his hand. He didn't want to think about the enemies on their tail, the assassins, the political factions, but reality was pressing in hard. "We'll make it," Adrian said, his voice stronger than he felt. "Where is this safe house of yours?" "It's a place no one knows about. Not even my own people." She paused, her gaze distant. "It's deep within the Valtherian territories, hidden away. Safe. For now." She turned the handle and pushed the door open. A gust of cool air greeted them, the night sky stretching out in front of them. It was almost peaceful, if only for a moment. As they stepped out into the night, the sound of distant sirens echoed through the streets. Adrian's instincts kicked in, urging him to move faster, to stay low and unnoticed. But Selis remained calm, her gaze scanning the surroundings, always alert. "This way," she urged, pulling him toward an alley. They kept moving, weaving through backstreets, staying out of the line of sight of any cameras or prying eyes. Adrian couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Selis navigated the streets of the city, like she was born to blend in, to remain unseen when necessary. She had the grace of someone who had been through this before. After what felt like an eternity of dodging patrols and security checkpoints, they finally reached a quiet part of the city. The buildings here were older, their architecture sleek but simple. No one seemed to be around. Selis turned to him, her expression softening for the first time since the assassination attempt. "We're almost there." Adrian nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. His thoughts were consumed by the bond, the unexplainable connection that had suddenly linked him to Selis. He could still feel it, faintly, like a pulse in his chest that matched hers. It was almost alive. "What does this mean?" he wondered. "Selis," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions swirling in his mind. "This bond, I don't understand. How is this even possible?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the ground for a moment before meeting his eyes. "It's not supposed to happen, Adrian. It's something that happens between Valtherian lifemates, people who are destined to be together, to be connected for life. It's a rare occurrence, and now it's happening between us," Adrian said, almost to himself. "That's insane. Why? How?" "I don't know," Selis admitted, her voice a quiet admission of vulnerability. "But what I do know is that this bond, whatever it is, has made us targets. The traditionalists, the ones who don't want humans and Valtherians to mix, they'll stop at nothing to prevent this from spreading. You and I, we're proof that the two species can unite. And they can't let that happen." Adrian took a deep breath. "So, we're in the middle of some intergalactic conspiracy?" She nodded. "Yes, and it's bigger than we realize." They reached the entrance to a narrow building, and Selis punched in a code on the security panel next to the door. The heavy metal door slid open, revealing a staircase that led down into the shadows. "This is it," Selis said, stepping inside and beckoning him to follow. Adrian hesitated for a moment, the weight of what she had just said sinking in. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, something that could change the fate of two species. And if the traditionalists had their way, that change would never come to pass. As they descended into the dimly lit basement, Selis stopped and turned to him. "We'll be safe here for a while, but I need to explain more. I need to show you something." "Show me what?" Adrian asked, his curiosity piqued. She walked to a wall at the far end of the room and pressed her palm against a hidden panel. The wall slid open, revealing a small, high-tech lab. Monitors blinked with data, and the air smelled faintly of chemicals. Selis moved quickly, almost as if she had done this 1,000 times before. She tapped a few keys on a terminal, and a screen came to life, showing a series of Valtherian DNA strands. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet but urgent. "This is the weapon they've been developing. It's designed to disrupt the compatibility between human and Valtherian genes, to prevent hybrids like you from being born." Adrian stepped closer, his eyes scanning the screen. It was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Strands of DNA, carefully manipulated, almost unnatural. "They're trying to use this to destroy any chance of a future for our species together," Selis continued, her voice filled with anger and resolve. "This weapon, if it's deployed, could kill off any human Valtherian hybrids before they even have a chance to exist. Are you saying they want to wipe out any chance of this bond ever happening again?" Adrian asked, his voice low. "Exactly," Selis said, her eyes flashing with determination. "But they're wrong. This bond between us, it's proof that we can evolve, that we can build something better together." Adrian felt the pulse in his chest again, stronger now. The bond was there, undeniable and real. He could feel it as if it were part of his own heartbeat. The connection between them wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something that made him want to protect her at all costs. But as much as he wanted to believe in the possibility of a future, he knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. They were in this together, whether they were ready for it or not. And the forces they were up against weren't going to give up without a fight. "We have to stop them," Adrian said, his voice steely. "We have to make sure this bond isn't just proof of our future. We have to make sure it's the future of both our species." Selis nodded, her violet eyes shining with fierce resolve. "And we will. Together." As the reality of their situation set in, Adrian knew one thing. The road ahead would be dangerous, and it would test everything he thought he knew about himself. But with Selis by his side, he wasn't alone. They were a force, one that couldn't be ignored. And together, they would fight for a future where their species could thrive, united. The days that followed felt like a blur. Adrian and Selis kept moving, staying hidden in the shadows of the Valtherian territories. The safe house, though concealed and well-secured, was far from a true refuge. It was a temporary stop, a place to catch their breath and strategize. The more they learned about the conspiracy against them, the more urgent their mission became. Adrian was still coming to terms with his transformation. The bond he shared with Selis was undeniable. It pulsed through him, like a constant hum beneath his skin. But the more time he spent with her, the stronger it became. And the more he realized that it wasn't just some alien connection. It was a fusion of their souls, a shared energy that bridged the vast distance between two entirely different species. It wasn't just the physical changes either. He felt different inside, more aware, more connected to the world around him. His senses were sharper. He could hear sounds from farther away. His eyesight was clearer, even in the dark. His body healed faster than ever before, and he felt stronger, more capable. But along with this newfound strength, he also felt a pull, a need to protect Selis, to be near her at all times. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Selis, on the other hand, had grown even more distant, her focus narrowing as she worked tirelessly to uncover the depth of the conspiracy. Every conversation they had seemed to circle back to the same question. How could they stop the biological weapon? One night, as they sat in the dimly lit room of the safe house, Selis spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. "They've already started testing it." Adrian looked at her sharply. "What do you mean? They're already trying to use it?" She nodded, her expression grim. "Yes. They've been testing it on Valtherian volunteers, trying to see if they can isolate the gene that makes hybrids possible. But the results, they've been unpredictable. Some of the subjects died. Others changed in ways they didn't expect." Adrian's stomach churned. He had no idea the weapon was that close to being deployed. Every day, it seemed like they were running out of time. And with every passing moment, the danger of their existence being wiped out grew more real. "We can't let them get away with this," Adrian said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of their situation. "We need to stop them before they perfect the weapon." Selis was silent for a moment. Then she looked at him, her violet eyes burning with determination. "We will. But we need to find the source, the lab where they're developing the weapon. If we can destroy the facility, we'll take down their entire operation." Adrian stood up, pacing the small room. The plan sounded risky, too risky. But the clock was ticking, and they had no other choice. "How do we find the lab? And how do we even get inside?" Selis walked over to a table in the corner, where a series of maps and blueprints were spread out. She ran her fingers over a detailed diagram of a heavily guarded facility. "This is where they're working," she said, pointing to a complex deep in the heart of Valtherian territory. "It's a government-run facility, but it's isolated. The security is nearly impenetrable." Adrian looked at the map, his mind calculating. "So it's basically a fortress." "Yes," Selis said, "but there's a weakness. The facility is connected to an underground network of tunnels, hidden from most of the guards. I've been there before." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You've been there?" Selis nodded. "Not to the lab itself, but I've seen the tunnels. They're our best shot." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of their plan settle on his shoulders. "All right, we'll need a distraction. A big one. Something to draw their attention away from the tunnels." Selis gave him a sharp look. "You're suggesting we cause chaos?" He smiled grimly. "Yeah, but we'll make it count." They spent the next few hours making plans, figuring out how to create the diversion and how to slip inside the facility unnoticed. As the hours passed, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that this was it, the point of no return. Once they went in, there was no coming back. But he wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when the future of their species was on the line. The night of the mission arrived, and the tension between them was palpable. They had gone over the plan a dozen times, making sure every detail was accounted for. Adrian had his weapon, and Selis had a small device that would help them navigate the tunnels. It was time to move. They made their way to the outskirts of the facility under the cover of darkness. The cold night air was sharp against Adrian's skin, but it didn't matter. They were ready. The diversion was simple but effective. Adrian used his military training to set off a series of explosions near the perimeter of the facility, causing a massive fireball to light up the sky. The explosion created chaos. Guards scrambled, sirens wailed, and alarms echoed through the compound. "That's our cue," Selis said, her voice steady despite the madness unfolding outside. They sprinted for the hidden entrance to the underground tunnels, their movements swift and synchronized. Every step felt like a countdown, the pressure mounting as they neared their goal. Adrian could hear the sound of footsteps behind them, but they were too fast, too determined. They reached the tunnels and slipped inside, the cool darkness closing around them. It was a tight fit, and the air was musty, but it was better than the alternative. "We need to hurry," Selis said, glancing over her shoulder. They moved quickly through the narrow passageways, their footsteps echoing off the walls. It felt like an eternity before they finally reached the heart of the facility, the lab. The door was heavily guarded, but they had expected that. Selis disabled the security system with a quick swipe of her hand, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the lab was eerily quiet, the hum of machines the only sound. Adrian's heart raced as they moved deeper into the room, making their way toward the central control panel. This was it, the moment that would either save their future or doom them. Adrian set his jaw. "Time to end this." Selis nodded. She approached the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. As the system started to shut down, Adrian kept watch, his eyes scanning the room for any movement. The seconds felt like hours. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a group of guards stormed in, weapons raised. "Stay back," Adrian shouted, drawing his gun. He fired quickly, taking down the first two guards, but they kept coming. The chaos from the explosion outside had clearly brought reinforcements, and they weren't going down without a fight. Selis acted fast, pulling out her device and sending out a pulse that disabled the rest of the guards' weapons. With a few more well-placed shots, the room fell silent. Adrian breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The control panel sparked, and Selis's face twisted in frustration. "No, no, no," she muttered. "It's malfunctioning. We need to get the core." She dashed to a nearby terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. Adrian, heart hammering in his chest, kept watch. He could feel the weight of their success, or failure, hanging in the balance. With a final press of a button, Selis stepped back, eyes wide with relief. "It's done. The system's destroyed." Adrian turned to her, his voice filled with disbelief. "You did it. We did it." Selis nodded, her expression softening for the first time in what felt like days. "We did. And it's not just us. It's the future." As they turned to leave, the world outside seemed a little bit brighter. The battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time, Adrian could see a path forward, a future where their species could unite and evolve together. Their bond, unbreakable, undeniable, had already set the wheels of change in motion, and no one, not even the traditionalists, could stop it. As Adrian and Selis made their way through the now silent corridors of the lab, the weight of their success settled on their shoulders. They had done it. They had taken down the heart of the conspiracy, destroying the weapon and the twisted plans to prevent the union between humans and Valtherians. But even as the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what lay ahead hit them harder than any explosion ever could. The guards, though defeated, had been just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. "We need to get out of here," Selis said, her voice low, but resolute. "Now." Adrian nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. The sounds of reinforcements outside grew louder, and the possibility of a counterattack was growing. The explosion had been a necessary diversion, but it had also sent a clear message to their enemies. They were coming for them. They slipped through the lab's back exit and made their way down a hidden tunnel that led to a remote exit point just outside the facility's perimeter. The air felt colder here, and the quiet seemed too unnatural for comfort, like the calm before a storm. They moved quickly but cautiously, every step echoing with the realization that their enemies would soon be on their tail. Once they reached the exit, Adrian turned to Selis. "Where do we go now?" Selis scanned the horizon, the faint outline of a distant city glimmering under the dim light of the early morning. "There's a safe house just outside Valtherian territory. It's neutral ground. No one knows about it except for a few trusted allies. We can regroup there." Adrian's mind raced. They had accomplished so much in a short amount of time, but now the real test began. The conspiracy might be dealt with for now, but the war between the traditionalists and those who supported the bond of their species had only just begun. There would be forces coming for them, forces that would stop at nothing to destroy everything they had fought for. "Then we move fast," he said, determination clear in his voice. It didn't take long for them to reach the safe house. By the time they arrived, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale light over the world. The small structure was hidden beneath the cover of trees and thick foliage, its entrance camouflaged to blend seamlessly with the environment. Inside, it was simple, bare walls, a few sparse furnishings. But it was safe, and it was theirs for now. Adrian sat down at a table, rubbing his temples as exhaustion caught up with him. Selis, too, seemed worn out, though she tried to mask it with an air of calm control. She walked to the small kitchen area and began to prepare a drink. As the minutes passed, the silence between them became heavy, both of them lost in their thoughts, processing what had just happened and what they were about to face. "You did good back there," Adrian finally said, breaking the quiet. His voice was steady, but there was a note of genuine gratitude in it. "You kept it together. You kept us alive." Selis looked up at him, a faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. "It's my job to protect you. But thank you." He chuckled lightly. "I think I'm the one who's been doing the protecting these days. Or at least I was." Her smile faded slightly, and she walked over to sit across from him. "You don't have to protect me anymore, Adrian. Not in the way you think." He met her gaze, a mix of confusion and understanding growing within him. The bond that tied them was undeniable, but it was evolving every day. They weren't just allies anymore. They were something more. Their connection was deeper than either of them had anticipated, a shared pulse that coursed through both of their bodies and minds. "I don't think I'll ever stop wanting to protect you," Adrian said quietly, his eyes softening. "I think that's just who I am now." Selis's gaze softened in return, her eyes searching his with an intensity that left him breathless. There was no need for words. They had already spoken volumes with their actions, with their sacrifices, with the bond they had forged in the heat of battle. And in that moment, there was no question in Adrian's mind about the future. They had been brought together by something far beyond circumstance, something that felt like destiny. They sat there in silence for a long time, both processing the weight of what they had accomplished and what they were about to face. The war was far from over, but they had made the first, crucial strike. Together, they had dealt a devastating blow to the traditionalists, and though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Their bond was the key to everything. "Do you think we can make it work?" Adrian finally asked. "The future? The bond? All of it?" Selis stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the quiet expanse of wilderness that surrounded them. "We have to make it work," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "It's not just for us, it's for all of us. For our species, for the future of everything we've fought for." Adrian's heart swelled as he rose from his seat and walked over to stand beside her. He didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, he knew one thing for certain. They had already changed the course of history. Their connection, their bond, was a living testament to what was possible when two worlds came together, defying the forces that sought to divide them. "We'll fight for it," Adrian said, his voice steady. Selis turned to face him, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "We'll fight for everything." And in that moment, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy, because together, they were stronger than anything that could stand in their way. They had already proven that. The war for the future had just begun. But with their unbreakable bond, Adrian and Selis would stop at nothing to see it through to the end.